So, how you guys doing? I was doing great, honestly. This morning, I woke up, I had my speech written. The keynote was I was going to start by thanking the organization, the National Youth Leadership Council, and I do want to thank the National Youth Leadership Council. You know, it's been around for 30 years. For 30 years. And when I found out this morning that it had been around for 30 years, I started to get nervous. Because I realized that I've been around for a little bit more than 30 years. And then I started to think about the opportunities that I missed out on because I didn't know the Leadership Council existed. So before I go into what I wanted to say, so I don't forget to thank the people I wanted to thank, I want to thank Ms. Bach for having me. I want to thank Amy, who I met earlier. I want to thank the young people who helped organize this. The thing that I found interesting when I got the program and I started reading the program, and I knew what I wanted to say, but more importantly, I knew that the reason I didn't stay to meet the youth leaders this morning is because I'm on deadline for my next book. So I told myself, listen, you speak at 11:30, you need to go back and get an hour right now. But while I'm walking down the street, I'm flipping through the program. Get to the room, I'm still flipping through the program. Now, I read about this group in Baltimore. These kids, they had a youth center. I guess they imagined that they needed a youth center in their community. And I guess the youth center that was already there didn't serve the purposes that they needed. I don't know. But I know what they did was they developed their own youth center. And I thought to myself, this is Baltimore, roughly 20, 30 minutes away from where I grew up. I would have never thought to do this as a child, nor did I even know that this existed. And then I read about some young people in Rhode Island. And Rhode Island is about an hour away from where I live now. They figured out how to use discarded cooking oil as a biodegradable fuel. You have to hear that again. They figured out how to use discarded cooking oil and recycle it and create a biodegradable fuel that actually provided energy for 210 homes. Now, what impressed me about this is that I'm a husband, I got 2 kids, I got a wife, and I often cook. And I know a lot of y'all are young, so y'all might not understand the entire cooking process. But the part that frustrates you the most is after you fry the chicken, you have all of this oil, and you wonder, what will I do with this oil? And because you want to be conscientious, you get a jar, mason jar, and you pour the oil in a mason jar. And you say, I'm going to reuse it. A week passes, you don't use it. Then you go to use it, but you're frying fish. So you say, I won't use it today. And then after a month, your wife says, why is that oil sitting there? Get rid of it. And I realized that this is, again, an instance where I could have done more, but hadn't. There's one more person that I read about that I wanted to make sure I met, and it's the teacher that also won one of the awards. It's Miss Beth Nickel. And I wanted to mention her because she's been doing this for 23 years, but if you remember Danielle's story, and a lot of us may have a similar story, there was a teacher who told her what she wouldn't do. All of us have a story about a teacher like that. I teach at 2 community colleges in Massachusetts, and one of my students just told me about his 3rd grade teacher who told him that he was going to prison. I couldn't understand how you tell a 3rd grader that, but it's not rare. And so I wanted to mention her because far too often what we have in our head as terrible teachers are these teachers who plant the seed of fear and the seed of failure and the seed of what we can't accomplish into our heads. But far too often we don't think about those teachers who push us towards a greater success. Yeah, y'all can clap. All right, so, but I had wrote a speech, and I abandoned my speech. And the reason why I abandoned my speech is because I just did not know what I could offer such a distinguished and audacious group of young people. I'm not really the sensitive type, and I cry rarely. But listening to Danielle talk, listen, you have to understand that I don't possess, and I definitely didn't possess as a child, the kind of tenacity that makes you say, there's a problem in this world, and I could change that problem. This is the boldest thing that I've ever seen in a group of young people. I spent a lot of time around young people. Over the past 8 years, I've been fortunate that I've had a chance to speak to all kinds of people. I've had a chance to be in a room with the Attorney General and talk to the Attorney General. I've had a chance to speak to lawyers, to doctors. I've had a chance to teach a wide range of people. But I've never been in front of a group of people and had so much envy for who they are and the potential that they hold. And you have to ask yourself, why really do I feel this way? Why am I envious of the position that you find yourself in? First, because none of you guys know what a beeper is, right? Nobody knows what a pager is. But the second reason is that this group is doing something at this very moment that I couldn't fathom existed when I was 16 years old. We always use these occasions and we tell ourselves that our stories are important, and we try to find reasons for our stories to be important. I've told my story so many times that I've gotten to the point where I no longer want to tell my story. And yet, I want to tell part of it today because part of it holds the kernel of what I think is most important in the charge, if I will give you, what I imagine I would ask you to do above what you've already done. So when I was 16, I was bright. I was always bright, I think, mostly. And I had a teacher. And, you know, you go to this, first of all, I met this woman because I got in a lot of trouble. And so she was the person that ran detention. And me and her became close friends. Over my 9th grade school year, I didn't have lunch. I had detention. And all I did was talk too much, really. But this woman was also the person that was responsible for those Jeopardy programs that they have in high schools. And so sometimes she would have the really bright kids who didn't talk a lot, who were expected to be leaders in the community, who were expected to go to college and go on and perform great things in the world. They would be in a room also. And trust me, as a young child, I was filled with a certain amount of resentment, you know. Because I sort of, all of my friends, they did this thing called busing. And so they would bus who they thought were the smart kids to the school that might be called a magnet school. And I was one of the people who got bused to a magnet school. And I always had this resentment that the people from my community weren't expected to excel, because I was the only one from my neighborhood who got sent to this other school. So I carried this around with me a lot. And when I would be in a room with other smart people whose parents had cars, whose parents lived in houses, whose parents weren't struggling to pay the bills, I resented the fact that I always felt like they thought that made them more intelligent than me. So one day I'm in a room, and they're practicing this Jeopardy game. And I know the answers to the questions. And now I feel that I'm actually smart because I'm actually competing with the people that I admire. Now, although I talked a lot, I was extremely insecure. And it took me a lot, really, to wait till everybody left and ask this woman, can I be on this team? I said, can I be on this team? She said no. She looked at me like it was a crazy question. In fact, she looked at me like the only reason I wanted to be on a team is because she ordered free pizza for them. I mean, and it devastated me. But look, I was so needy. This is after my year of detention. This is in 10th grade when I started going there because I wanted some peace at lunchtime, and I wanted to get away from the chaos that was often, frankly, me and my friends, right? I just wanted to get away. So this is me trying to be something different. And the woman says, no. So I stayed though, because this really was my spot. It was not my home, but it was a place that I felt safe, a place that I felt comfortable, and I thought maybe I could change her mind. Then, a tragic thing happened. One of my friends, something crazy happened to one of my friends, and I won't even go into it. But something terrible happened. And one day the lady got mad at me. She said, you're going to end up just like Charles. And this was when I was 16, before I got into a whole lot of trouble. And you know, more than anything else from high school, I remember her words. You're going to end up just like Charles. And then why am I telling you this? Because the reality is that there were other young people in the room with us. And these young people were considered the leaders of the school. They were the ones who were expected to go to college. And I find that leadership is more than being able to accomplish something. I think leadership is the ability to see somebody else in your community and say, look, you should roll with me. And say that you could be a part of this. And not even say instead of being a part of that. Just say that I have this thing that I'm doing and maybe you would be interested in doing it. Because I'm being perfectly honest. I got a presidential appointment. I've never paid for college. I wrote a book. I've done fairly well since I've been an adult. But as a child, nobody expected anything of me. And more importantly, as a child, nobody said, let me give you the opportunity to excel. Service learning is about giving somebody the opportunity to develop their own talents and their own strengths. And so when you go home, one of the things I want to leave you with is that one of your obligations to the world is to not just excel for yourself. Because trust me, when I listen to the two young people who are the youth MCs, I was impressed. In fact, I started to send a note and say, listen, when you read my bio, just say that Reginald Dwayne Betts has 2 beautiful sons and he's married. Because I knew that nothing else on my bio stacked up to what I would hear about them. To this point, I'm still thinking that I don't know how you accomplish this much at such a young age. So it's important for me to recognize that this group is probably all highly accomplished and distinguished. But the way you should judge yourself and the way you should judge your talents should go beyond that. You should think about to what degree you've been able to help somebody else become close to what you are, to become more than what you are. When we say the children are our future, and then we change and we say, no, the children are our now, then that means that you also have the responsibility to change and impact the people around you in a way in which adults really don't expect you to. But we should. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about literature while I was on this stage. So I asked a question, and you do a favor for me. Raise your hand if you have ever heard of this writer. John Edgar Wideman. All right, so what they do when they put you on stage is they have these really, really bright lights, and they are so that you can't see anything that happens in the audience. So I assume everybody had their hand up, right? All right, so everybody has to look up John Edgar Wideman. But John Edgar Wideman is an amazing writer, and he wrote this book called Cattle Killing. And in the book called Cattle Killing, there was this scene in which a tribe in South Africa was at war. And what happened was they were losing, but this tribe relied on the cow for everything, right? So they relied on it for food, they relied on it for milk, they just relied on the cows for everything. And there was a part in the book where one of the young girls who had went, basically, these 2 young girls went to a lake, and they weren't supposed to go by themselves. And one escaped and one didn't escape. And the book never says what happened to the one that didn't escape, but it says that what she did when she came back. When she came back, she said that she had a vision. And she said that in the vision, she saw what was needed for the tribe to survive. And what was needed for the tribe to survive was that they needed to kill their cattle. Now, when the elders and the leaders first heard this, they said, this is absurd. If we kill our cattle, we might as well be killing ourselves. So there's no way that we'll do this. But the war started going worse and worse for them. And so they ended up killing their cattle. And what happened to their cattle, they perished. So John Edgar Wideman adds he says, the key to that story is that they didn't realize that you can't fall asleep in your enemy's dream. Now, the question becomes, what is your enemy's dream? And how are you aware of what your enemy's dream is? Well, Danielle just told us a story, and she's very much aware of what the enemy's dream is. It's the teacher who told her to stop asking questions because she wouldn't understand. It's all the people who expected her never to make it to college. I became aware of what my enemy's dream was after I basically ruined my own life. And I became aware of the fact that people have expectations for you based on who you are and what they think you'll be based on prejudice, bias, or just a lack of belief. That's your enemy's dream. Now, the secret, I think, to success is to push back against that, to never fall asleep in your enemy's dream, and to look around you and notice your friends and the people in your community who seem to be seduced by a dream that you know will lead to their own ruin, and to be willing to say something about it. It's very difficult to speak when you watch somebody ruining themselves and when you watch somebody destroying themselves. Which is, and I'll wrap this up in a couple minutes. I want to tell you about my relationship to service learning and how I realized that it's not only important, but it has always been the key to what I am right now. So I'll tell you an interesting story, and I'll try to end on a high note, and I'll try to end on a note that says what happened to me when I abandoned what I term as my enemy's dream. So I was at the Fairfax County Jail, and I went to this teacher, and I said, I want to get a GED. And the lady looked at me, and I was 5'5", 125 pounds. And the woman looked at me, and she looked at me as if she noticed that I looked like a kid. And she said, what classes were you taking in high school? So long story short, she ended up, and she taught at an alternative school, she ended up helping me get my high school diploma. But what she required of me is that I become a tutor, and I learn how to be a tutor, and I train myself to be a tutor. So for years, that's what I did. I worked as an educator. And then finally, when I came home, that's what I did. I worked as an educator. Then I worked in a bookstore. And this is the final story. I worked in a bookstore. Woman comes in a bookstore, asks to buy a book for herself. She says, I want this book. I said, okay. She had her son with her. I said, you should buy a book for your son. She said, no. I said, I'll give you 10% off. She said, no. So I give you 15% off. She said, no. Then things began to become uncomfortable because the book is only $3 or $4 anyway. So I did what most people would do in a situation like this. I let her leave, and later on that night, I called my friend, and I made fun of her. My friend said, how are you going to make fun of her? What are you actually doing? And maybe she didn't have money for the book, right? And so now I taught for years in prison. And I came home, and the first thing I did was work with young people and teach. But I still didn't understand actually what it meant to work to serve somebody else and how that would improve who it was that I was as a person. And at that moment, I began to see it, though. I saw a need, and the need was I wanted young men to read more. And I said, okay, how do I fill this need? And I decided to start a book club. But the book club was my decision on what I could do to change a small portion of my community. And I consider that service learning. And I did it for a year. And after doing that, everything that you see that I've accomplished started with that one thing. Me writing a book began because a newspaper profiled me because of the book club I ran. Me getting several of the scholarships I got for college happened because of stories I was able to tell that happened during that book club. And so now, when I think of service learning, I think of it as an opportunity not only to do something else, but to gather some skills that I have been able to use for the rest of my life and some skills that I'll build my life upon. So 2 things I want you to remember as I get off the stage. It's always weird when you stand on the stage and the whole audience is quiet. You never know if what you're saying makes any sense. Now, it is really an eerie feeling. So I hope that something I'm saying makes sense. And I'm going to repeat the only 2 things that I think are important. When I was 15, I was not like anybody in this room, but I had the potential to be like somebody in this room. And so what I want to ask of the young people in this room is that you not only do the work that you do, but you look around you and you see the young people around you who may not be as motivated as yourself. And you take the time to reach out to them to see if you could do something to change their perspective on the world. Because you've already demonstrated that you have a tenacity and an audacity that's rare based on what you've accomplished. But to truly change the world, the next step would be to see how you could broaden your reach. 2, which most of you already recognize, but never fall asleep in your enemy's dream. You'll get up one day and you'll start to expect that maybe you aren't on the right path, or maybe you can't do something, or you can't accomplish something. You should always remember that that is not the dream that you have for yourself, but that is your enemy's dream. And you should hold fast to that idea, because I think that idea will carry you through even the most difficult phases of your life, because at times it will get difficult. And now, as we prepare to listen to the governor talk to you, and I'm really thankful to be able to say that I spoke at the same stage that the governor spoke on. I thank you guys for listening, and I look forward to the question and answer session. Will definitely be more engaging and more interesting, because you will have to talk as well as me. So I look forward to that. Thank you.